Hello and welcome to the Hacking State podcast. This is your host, Alex Mershak. With me today is Dr. Matthew Mehan. Dr. Mehan is the Associate Dean and Assistant Professor of Government for Hillsdale College's Steve and Amy Van Andel's Graduate School of Government on their DC campus at the Kirby Center, as well as the author of two children's books, The Handsome Little Cygnet and Mr. Mehan's Mildly Amusing Mythical Mammals. Dr. Mehan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Alex, for having me.
Thank you for coming on. So I wanted to talk to you today. I mean, first of all, a little bit of background on my introduction to you. We spoke a little bit before the show started, but I also went ahead and purchased one of your children's books for one of my little brothers. I have many siblings, and one of them is quite young, and I bought, I believe it was Mr. Mehan's Mildly Amusing Mythical Mammals back for Christmas one year for my little brother. And the reason for that purchase is I found it interesting that there was a children's book that's available that seemed to embody the kind of like classical values of a children's book, in that it had poetry. It also involved very like elegant and beautiful paintings. And it also had, it addressed sort of core values that are important in the rearing of children that a lot of children's books these days either don't address, or they address it in some very superficial way. Like, it's all about the meaning of friendship or something like that, which is not trivial. But I found that a lot of the books that are available on the market are sort of lacking a kind of substantive core, or they've been politicized in some way. And so I just wanted to get started with that and ask you, what motivated you to first start writing children's books?
I was practicing all of my writing in a kind of homage to great statesmen and leaders who always sort of made sure that their pen was strong for whatever occasion was required. Just rhetoric being, the art of persuasion in a peaceful milieu, right? But something more than just the plain facts that don't move anyone. So I was practicing my writing, and I was doing some Aesopic children's poems. But to be perfectly honest, the reason I chose that genre, which kicked off the seed for Mehan's Mammals, which are these sort of Aesopic but sort of much more whimsical bestiary of poems going through the alphabet, was the end of Plato's Phaedo, where he's stuck in prison for a few weeks, waiting for the Delian, or no, what is it? The embassy to Crete to come back, I believe. And so there's no executions allowed. So his execution is stayed out of sort of piety. And the whole time he's writing Aesop's fables, but putting them into verse, into song, which I found a very curious thing. Why would Socrates' last exercises before his death be poetic representations of moral truths? I mean, I think in part it's the understanding that, right, the way in which you bring philosophy into the city, the way you bring truth to your fellow man, is very often through, right, some kind of rhetorical strategy, some kind of beautiful image. And I think poetry is one of those incredible things that is undervalued in our day. And people who actually care about capital T truth, real truths, don't often do this work. But so I was kind of just moved, like, well, I don't see anyone else doing this. It was good enough for Socrates. It's good enough for me. And so that's how Mehan's Mammals began.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's interesting that you saw poetry as a way to sort of bring philosophy into the city. I wanted to ask you, I mean, you'd be more familiar with this side of things than someone like myself. My background is more in political theory directly. And I mean, I did do sort of a focus in English of sorts, but in my particular university education, it wasn't very well integrated. And so the two sides were very often not speaking to one another. I mean, there was a little bit of of
Right.
poetry or epic covered in our core curricula, but the English classes I was taking were totally unrelated. So I wanted to ask you, like, what is the like relationship of poetry to philosophy historically? Because they're sort of seen as separate realms.
I mean, look, you've got the famous feud with in Plato's Republic, Socrates and Homer. But in one sense, that feud is, I think, in a certain sense, aphoretic or a display to sort of force young people who prefer the pleasure of images to engage in the hard work of clarifying the principles that accompany or undergird those images. And so Homer needs to be purified, corrected, cleansed, judged, right? You need a sort of critical apparatus. But you notice Socrates winds up making a host of references by heart to Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey, and he knows his poetry very well. And in fact, a lot of the arguments in Plato's Republic you can find were taken from the Homeric epics, right? But they're embedded very sort of cleverly, and only the sharpest readers will track them. So I tend to think that the relationship between them is, in a certain sense, very close in that they're both means of pursuing truth uh, and the good and being, and but the one is basically because it's an image, it's much more subject to error and misinterpretation. And the other, because of its difficulty and exactitude, is much less likely to be practiced by the many.
Mm.
And so you get a kind of complex choreambic dance between logic and rhetoric, philosophy and poetry, the appeal to the heart, which does connect to the head in many subtle ways, and the appeal to the head itself. And since we are a composite being, and we have many parts, and we have both passions and reason and a will to adjudicate these matters, it winds up being a very delicate and complex relationship.
Yeah, and there's a lot of subtlety there, I guess, working out, the differences in human experience and how we make sense of the world, and then how we choose to act in terms of our discernment of what we what we perceive and what we can make sense of. Um, I think discernment, and feel free to push back on this, or interpret it however you'd like. But I think that discernment is increasingly becoming um, more important as our society gets sort of mediated more thoroughly in every way by technology. This is sort of one of the themes of the show, and also just a personal interest of mine as someone who, I guess now is working in tech. I'm a software developer, but I have this sort of humanist background. And one of the things that's occurring to me as more and more of our lives are taken over by this technology that's been enabled through science and through engineering is that um, our capacities have been increased dramatically. Our powers to manage nature and manage each other, but there doesn't seem to me to be enough focus on um, the training of our discernment, which to me would seem to be the most important thing, given that our power is increasing. How do you think about the relationship of, I guess, the increase of our technological prowess and its relationship to discernment? I think a well-examined life is perhaps one of the better ways to approach increasing our capacity for discernment. And I believe that it's not enough to be technically powerful alone. You also have to have that um, judgment.
Yeah, I mean, discernment, judgment, prudence, a good mother wit, as Chaucer put it, right? Like without which all other learning is half lame, as the statement continues. You have to have that. Look, yeah, I mean, there's a number of ways to take that question. I'd say one of them is there's little doubt in my mind that moral philosophy, moral training has been evacuated from Western culture, Western education in a very powerful way, starting in the beginning of the 20th century. And it's only now that people are just starting to wake up generally as to the results of such a horrific vacuity. And people are sort of scrambling to find something to replace what has sort of like a zombie fever replaced the husk of education with a new soul of false virtue, which oftentimes gets referred to as woke or whatever, right? There's all kinds of ways of talking about it, ideological possession, etc.
Mm,
Why that is a long story, but I do think it's just the case. I even amongst very serious educators that wanted to educate people morally, there was a debate going on in the 90s about, well, how do you bring the virtues to children, right? How do you educate for virtue so that people can be more discerning and more prudent and actually live well? And the answer was just give them just a sense of goodness and a few like sort of high order elements like magnanimity and generosity. Just teach them that, and then the rest will all follow. Well, it turns out that's ridiculous, and no one has ever successfully right trained oneself in virtue without being able to name, identify, define, and set up with powerful imaginary or real examples of the various virtues that one might need to be fully human, right? This is humanitas, humanism, the good kind, right? Like,
mm,
so just that debate, which I think basically closed in the 20 teens, where no, that's ridiculous. You actually need to teach people virtue through good story, good image, good discipline, good history, good ethics, good philosophy. Because the penchant, the desire to sort of call a truce on the grounds of, look, let's just teach them reading, writing, and arithmetic. The problem, as I like to pat about the United States, clamoring and repeating myself, is they have to write something, they have to read something, and they have to count something, right? And those somethings are going to have actual heft and content. So, what are you going to teach them? And there you have to ask a question about human nature and what is human flourishing and what leads people to happiness and what is virtue and excellence, and all those questions come flowing right back in the back door. That's one way you could go with that answer. The other one, with regard to tech, since this
mm,
is your podcast and not a liberal arts or classical classroom, uh, the I part of the danger I see right now is something I refer to as the tyranny of velocity. Is all of this power that technology has given us, and it is formidable. All of this power has, to my mind, increased the speed with which you can accomplish tasks. And that speed is, to a certain degree, approaching a level uh, that's beyond human powers of discernment, right? Like, AI is, in a certain sense, a kind of like perfect example of this. We're going to do
mm,
things that are way faster than any human could ever get them done, right? Because if you asked any human being, hey, write me code for this, or write me an email that does this, or write me a bedtime story with these 5 parameters,
mm,
a lot of, not everyone, but a lot of educated people could do it. It would just take them longer, right? They would just have to research and think and work. And obviously, I don't think the AI can do a lot of these things as well, for reasons we can discuss too. But nevertheless, the speed does actually, in a certain sense, rob people of the proper reflective time to deliberate and consider what is best. And I do think that's something we have to attend to, whether it takes the shape of kind of selective Ludditism, or the shape of both selective Ludditism and a certain kind of humanism in programming. I'll leave that department to you, but You know, that's something I think we just need to bear in mind. So in that sense, I'm in vociferous agreement with your concern about the need for more discernment, not less, in the technological computing age.
Yeah, I mean this term velocity of is it tyranny of velocity? I wrote it down because I mean I don't know if it's if you coined it, but it sounds like
I believe it's fine.
something that yeah, well that's good. I'll give you due credit, but I think it's something
Rarely do
that
I get to coin anything.
there is a way in which yeah, things can move much faster than a human time scale is adequate for like for just like processing and comprehending, right? The changes move so quickly. And there's also this issue of yeah, I think the inability or the people's perception of themselves as too busy to do any kind of meaningful reflection is another part of it that's sort of generally part of like the pace of life or a certain kind of life that many of us are committed to at this point. You know, it reminds me of I read this book, Deep Work by Cal Newport, who's a
Sure.
computer science professor, MIT, and you know the guy is obviously working on very high level computer science problems all day long in his day work, and he has a rule for himself, which is, and he recommends this in the book, which is basically after he gets out of work and walks home, there's no internet. Like there's a complete um blockout of the internet and even using a computer of any kind after hours. And you might think, well, for a computer science professor, how could you? And the thing is, like for him, it was about creating a separation in his brain between here's the time when I'm using the internet and here's the time when I'm not. And most of us don't have that at all. It's a completely permeable barrier. And there's no containerization. There's no real space where you're separated at all from um, this stuff that's just connecting you to the whole world all of the time. Um, and
Right.
so,
And so you find people making a lot of what look like arbitrary inconveniences for themselves
mm,
in order to try to sort of roadblock the permeable state. But go on, please.
oh no, so I was gonna say though, that's like just a stellar example of somebody who's like taking the time to assess, okay, how is this actually affecting me? How's this affecting my relationship to the other people around me? How am I acting just in everyday life? I think people are generally getting better at not using their phones at dinner. um, but um, there is a way in which, you know, we can reclaim some of our own agency and use our own ability to sort of step away from it as a kind of like taking the power back. You know, these machines are here to serve you. You're not supposed to be serving them. So that's just one point on the tyranny of velocity. But I also wanted to ask you because I've tried to focus the last year or so on philosophy of technology. Obviously, there are writers about this throughout human history. One such writer that is quite notable is Martin Heidegger, and Heidegger wrote a little bit about the the issue of technology itself, and in particular, he wrote about how technology has this kind of he wouldn't use the term alienation, but essentially he's describing an alienating effect on um on human beings and our familiarity with our own nature. And one of the things he says at the end of the question concerning technology, which is sort of his essay on technology, is that he quotes Holderlin and he says, where the danger grows, so lies the saving power also. Do you think that there's a way in which we could leverage technology to sort of help us return to a more human centered and human paced way of life?
So I think so, but I don't think it's as kind of awesome as one might hope from such a question. In this sense, uh, our probably mutual friend James Poulos always talked about how the internet, the World Wide Web, has basically created a kind of medieval encyclopedic sort of Isidore of Seville like um, milieu where you gather everything together to remember now. Sort of memory has, yes, in one sense, it's been offshored to the internet, like ask Google, but in another sense, and I'm speaking for myself, or I don't know if James would agree with everything I'm saying now, but in another sense, there's there's the ability to recall all of these ancient things with a finger swipe, right? You can find these things. I think actually there's something like that happening. I mean, you mentioned very kindly. I'm glad you bought the book for your little brother. Mehan's Mammals has this huge glossary in the back. That
Mhm.
glossary would have taken me 15 years to write. Like it's really cool. There's all these different things floating around in there. It's its own kind of literary performance, just the glossary. It's not just a glossary, but that the ability to find what I needed from everyone from Isidore of Seville to Sam Johnson to Ben Jonson to Diogenes Laertius to Shepherd's Calendar of Spencer, the ability to just pull all these things together and
Mhm.
find parallels and find conversations and then put them before you for your formation in the liberal arts and sort of human wisdom. Like that's totally the product of the interwebs. It just is. um I mean I did a lot of book learning that really wasn't on the internet, and so that was obviously the sort of hardware, but the software was software. I used the internet to collate all these things and write a really great book that reminds everyone of the tradition. So I think there are things like that happening. Um, but that's not necessarily like I've invented some AI Jarvis that's going to like police the internet. It seems to my mind just the response out, offered as an anecdote sounds almost like charmingly homey and less kind of Deus ex machina, sort of in the way your questions seem to promise from Heidegger. I don't know if that's useful an answer, but
Well, maybe. I mean, I'm not really sure. I mean, Heidegger's like he leaves the essay kind of ambiguous what exactly his final conclusion is. The way that
right.
I interpreted at the time, after reading it a few times, was basically that there's a chance that we could just rediscover our human nature, um, by sort of just, I don't know, grinding through the continual like revealing of technology, but I'm not sure if I'm ready to go fully into the question concerning technology right now. I just wanted to mention that to see what you thought about the potential for its redemptive qualities.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm the general answer beyond what I just offered
mm,
with regard to memory. Um, to my mind, the general answer is I find there is a certain imprudence in the hope that as evil heightens, good will sort of present itself. It's sort of similar, and I hear that language a lot. It's sort of similar to like, gosh, there's going to be a backlash soon, right?
right,
It's like,
right. One
no,
of these days,
you're the backlash, right? So what are you going to do? Like human prudence with regard to every particular technological advancement or technological invasion of your life or home, like it just requires human prudence. Like you've just got, like you're back to discernment. You've just got to be discerning because sometimes it's just evil and it's just bad and you have to say no. And other times it has a good, but it has a downside, and then you have to find the hack for it, or maybe there isn't one for now, and but it's tolerable as like there's no getting around prudence, and there's almost something Kantian in the formula of like, see, it's all going to balance out like a math problem, right? Like if you heighten this power, you'll have these powers. Like I don't know. Like you can like civilizations end, like cities fall, right? Like there is tragedy, right? Like it's not all technology can't be. It just cannot be simply comic, right? Where there's
Mm.
misunderstandings and problems, but it always ends in a wedding and not a death, right? Like I just like that's not true. That's not true to life because we're involved with tech.
So, given that um, the people of the future are going to be those tautologically who are around for it, um, it seems to me like the rearing of children is sort of one of the core issues of how you um, how you begin to shape some vision of the future that you would find suitable. Um, and I wanted to talk a little bit. I know that you have many children, and of course, you're a very successful children's author. So I'm sure you've thought about these questions a lot. How do you think about the balance between exposure and discretion when considering children's participation in technology, the internet, social media, more specifically? Um,
Yeah.
is there a way you try to strike a balance between giving them familiarity with that world while also reminding them of the fact that they're not um, they don't want to entirely be creatures of it?
Yeah, I mean, so the balance to my mind seems to me to be uh making sure that the natural and normal rhythms of child formation are not disrupted. And that's, once it's like, okay, it's like Steve Martin's old joke, how to make $1 million tax free in 10 easy steps. Step one, get $1 million, right? It's like, that's the whole show. And once it's, but if you think of like the normal route, a child until what, maybe 15 or 16, maybe in a more complicated era, 18 or 20, but basically is under the direct guidance and care of their parents, and then are entrusted to particular people, right, or institutions that are standing in loco parentis, like they're on behalf of the parent, for designed specifically for the formation of the child, right? School, coaching, tutoring, parenting. That's basically that's and soul craft, like priests, pastors, that kind of thing. That's
Mm,
it, right? So you introduce with tech other groups into the home, and into the formation stream. You gotta think about whether that's a violation of those norms. And it seems to me when you think about different tech, and I basically I have, there's three groups for tech, and then there's two devices. There's the computer and then the handheld device, phone and small tablet, and then the desktop computer or laptop. There's sort of hybrid. The larger iPad and the laptop are sort of in between, but basically those are the two groups, right? Um, but uh, but then there's the three categories, which it seems to me to be, right, like your peer group, uh, social media, and then the internet, right? Like the World Wide Web, particular social media, and then your peer group. Now, your peer group comes in with email. It can come into social media on closed DMs and group chatting and things like that, both on the computer, on the phone, etc. Right? But so those are the sorts of, like, those are the fields in which you've got to think, and then you've got to think about them according to that in loco parentis thing. Now the trick is when you get to the friend pools, which maybe I can take that up first because it's in one sense more complicated, because obviously they need playmates, they need entertainment, and they need to start learning how to do friendship, right?
mm,
But the question is, how much friendship? Do they have access to the child at all times? right? And that seems to me to be quite unnatural, that the friend group basically is overpowering the parental and the educational in loco parentis authority figures that are helping form the child. And I do think that that's the case when you allow too much email, too much group texting, and too much social media, where your friends are always on your mind and always in your pocket or always in front of your face. And there's sort of a suffocating experience, to the point where a lot of people have actually written on this about how uh, parents are a much weaker authority now, as are teachers, and the peer group has supercharged amounts of power over the concern for what is right and wrong, right? That people will lie to their parents before they'll lie to a friend every time. Like in polls, there's lots of kids who answer that now, like, oh no, I would never lie to my bros, but my parents, of course, right? Teacher, you bet.
Mm.
That sort of those kinds of intimate bonds have flipped, and I think social media and tech has something to do with it. So that has to be minded, right, and sort of moderated, so that that you actually are continuing to form a child for adulthood in virtue and skills. Um, and then, um, but then you get to social media and you go, wait a minute, does Instagram as a company for profit, are they there? Is their purpose to form my child for adulthood? Is Instagram in loco parentis? Is Pinterest in loco parentis? Is TikTok in loco parentis, in the place of the parent?
Mm.
Absolutely not. They're just not. Like, that is not what they're trying to do, even on their best representation of themselves, right? Never mind their worst. They do not say they're doing that. That's not what they're offering. That is not their purpose, right? That's not what their stockholders and shareholders are told. That's not what the CEO says to the company employees. That's not their public facing job. So, to my mind, that alone, just thinking it through rationally, a whole bunch of conclusions follow, which we can talk about. But I think those are just kind of baseline ways to think that through, as a starting point.
Okay, so basically trying to delimit the roles of each of these spheres in your children's life and make them kind of distinctive from the the forever roles, right? That every parent and every child in every society that's ever existed has had. And then, you know, just identifying to the children and to others around you as well, um, what the proper role of these things is or might be. It does seem to me like there is a way in which the some aspects of the company um at least would like to try to play that role. Um and I'm thinking of examples like YouTube Kids, right, which is the YouTube the kids version of YouTube that like does the recommendations for children. um what's going on there? Well, at the end of the day, they just identified a market segment, and they figured out that they were going to get blowback if kids were watching videos intended for adults. So they decided to start curating that content for the kids. But it's not at all intended to be any kind of moral training or even socialization for your children. It's some sort
Right.
of mindless entertainment product that you put in front of a whiny 6-year-old when they're not behaving at a restaurant, or at least
Could
maybe you don't, but someone does.
yeah, no, I don't. But do you remember the Truman Show, the movie
Yeah,
The
yeah.
Truman Show,
Hmm.
when uh Jim Carrey is talking with his wife and they're having a heated, like, I'm not happy, and then she suddenly like talks about some spatula, and it's clearly one of those advertisements that are laced into their conversation, and he's like,
Yeah.
who are you talking to? Right, like looking around the room, right? YouTube Kids, yeah, they might curate the content, but could you imagine a teacher or a tutor or a babysitter suddenly like, let me tell you about Mattel's brand new, robot baby doll, right? Like suddenly advertising to your child, right?
Right,
And like
right.
whetting their appetite for various products and acquisitions without any concern for what the parents want, but actually answering to some other corporate entity, right? No matter how they kind of style themselves, the sheer engine of those things are not in loco parentis. They're not serving the parent. They're not serving the household, right? There's a there is a there is a different kind of contractual arrangement going on there, right? That's multi-party. They are sort of serving the kids and parents in some way, but they're not actually in loco parentis. They're not acting with the child's best interest in mind on behalf of the parents, whose job it is to do that by nature, right? So that's the problem. Is, however, I mean, I've seen right now, because they're worried about getting banned. I know Instagram is now having all of these really wonderful, like, here's how to use all of our uh, parent screen time temperance widgets, right? They're
All of our
running a ton of
controls.
ads like that right now. Yeah,
Yeah.
TikTok's doing it too. But why? Because they realize that they addicted a bunch of kids, and now there's a bunch of mad parents, right? And so they're sort of trying to change their tune. But the reason why that happens is because they have someone else in mind. This is the same, just as a, forgive me for being somewhat political, but I am a government professor, and this is the fight with the teachers unions, right?
Mm.
The union is some other kind of party, right? That is its own entity, that is not working for and bonded to and concerned with serving the household for the education of that child. And there's tension between the union and what parents want. That's the whole fight over the COVID shutdowns, and why Randy, what's her name, Gardner, or I forget,
Mm.
never, the head of the teachers union, I can never say her name right. Why she's getting played right now, and why she's trying to sort of misrepresent how she was wanted to remain shut down, because all the teachers didn't want to take the risk to serve the kids, and the union turtled up and fought like heck to keep the schools closed, and all the parents desperately wanted teachers to do that. Private schools that answer directly to parents, uh, they remained open, whereas public schools that answer to unions, among other things, did not. And so there's this tension, but I think with tech and children, there's a similar one.
I just wanted to ask, now that you brought up the unions, what do you think about the problem of the politicization of education more generally? I guess public education specifically, um, because it seems to me like, it's interesting that the left wing argument has always been that it's fine for us to politicize education because there is always a political ethos implicit in the education. And I think that's fair to an extent, but I think the issue is that the way it's being politicized is very clearly not in the best interest of the social fabric of the society, or living up to American ideals, or preparing, never mind preparing children to take on the vicissitudes of life. Um, it's very obvious that the way it's being politicized right now is serving some sort of mess of other agendas. Um, and I just wanted to ask you, do you think of education a as an apolitical kind of objective training in morals, or in um socialization, or do you think that there's always some sort of implicit politics in the education of children? And if so, what might that look like in an ideal situation?
Yeah, I guess it just depends on what you mean by politics. If you think that civic life is something that is required of those who are citizens, right? Meaning, like, if it's something you just have to do because it's the nature of your political community, the nature of your society, is that you have certain rights and responsibilities, like voting and sitting on juries, and perhaps holding office, or at least, right, holding office holders accountable, etc. Um, And we do. We've got a free society, such as it is, with all its, crippled dysfunctions and problems and threats to such. But nevertheless, you have them. Um, well, then it's more of like, is that political? Is it, partisan? No, it's actually a recognition of moral duty. Like, you got some things you got to do, and so you need to be able to do them well. And so then you're thrown back on the nature of the thing, and you can say, that's political. You're making decisions about the nature of things. It's like, well, politics does have to judge the nature of things and set laws and make rules. So I guess in that sense, education is political, um, but I think there's a lot of pre-political parts of education. There's a lot of general humane arts and letters, science, things like that that are good simply for everyone, regardless of what kind of society they live in. But it seems to me that it would be absolutely, uh, ridiculous on its face to release a bunch of young 18-year-olds into the world with the right to fight, the right to, or the duty to fight, some of them, the right to vote, and sit on juries and contract marriages, hold jobs, right? Do all these important, responsible things without basically an eye to some civic education alongside all the rest. Um, so, that requires history, which has a whole bunch of moral decisions embedded in it. Um, but I guess I'm refusing a kind of just like, yep, it's political, or no, it's definitely not. Like, because it's, I don't know, just civilization is more complicated than that, right? Like, it's a judgment call, and too much of it becomes sort of, like, and you see this, like, everyone's basically like, you're communist, you're fascist, left versus right. There's too much ideological demands, like your child must be this way exactly, right?
Yeah.
So a
Why don't you
certain
tell me
act of,
exactly what you are? I get that a lot.
well,
I get people being like,
right.
"Hey, I can't figure out what you are. Can you label yourself, please?" I'm like, no.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's like the old Far Side. There's this dude sitting in his front lawn panting with an empty bucket of black paint and a black smeared brush, and all around him is everything's labeled with sloppy black paint: door, house, wife, dog, cat, fence. And then he's just panting. He says, well, that ought to clear a few things up around here. Like, I need labels. I can't handle anything but labels. I
Right.
always thought that was indicative of of the current climate. Um, yeah, but again, I do think that we are moral agents.
Mm.
We are always choosing good or evil, prudence or imprudence. Always. Right now, you and me, everyone watching this, should either be doing something else or doing this, right? Like, that's it. Like, everyone's got to be doing something correctly or incorrectly, to varying degrees of correctness or incorrectness. So the idea that educating people to be successful adults will be free of morals is ludicrous, right? That's just, I don't understand what a human being is, or choice, or free will, or liberty, or vice and virtue, right? Or pain and pleasure. These are basics. So I do think that, sort of like, I want an amoral curriculum. Like, that's not happening. That's not rational, because we're not amoral beings. If we were, then there'd be some hope of that. Um, but again, what does that take shape? I think when people hear that, they think of like some kind of, uh, constrictive, horrified, sort of ethically locked down, I don't know what, sort of Salem witch trials meets, um, Nazi Germany meets, the Spanish Inquisition, right? Some kind of weird, repressive regime in education. The liberal arts, the arts of liberty, classical education,
Mm.
logic, grammar, stories of goodness and bad, fairy tale, imagination, rhetoric, the art of persuasion, the primacy of right over might, the preference for peace, the art of friendship, the rule of law. Like, these are moral things, but they're quite freeing. There's a lot of open interpretation in them. But I think there are adept ways to do this and less adept ways, but I think you have to accede to the principle that whatever we do is going to have a moral core to it of some sort. And ignoring that is, like I said before, why like the center has been filled with something completely alien to the American tradition. And I think to human happiness and flourishing, it's utterly bonkers, in part because everyone everyone was willing to say, great, I don't want to make decisions about morality. And people who wanted to slide these ideologies in were like, great, I'm willing to lie about this not being moral and not having a. So the combination of that handshake led to a disaster, which we're now starting to unravel now, I hope.
Mm. Yeah, I think generally speaking, there's just been an abdication of dare I say it, moral responsibility, both in training the next generation as well as just kind of participation in civic life. And I think a lot of what we're talking about when we talk about whether education is political are just the preconditions for self-rule, right? The whole point of a liberal education was to teach people how to be self-governing and to get a truly self-governing population. And I think the issue before us is if if people's um if the liberal education has been degraded so much and people's understanding of self-rule and their role in society has receded so far, is there even still a possibility for genuine self-government? I think that's a something that we have to probably be contending with, and what that means for our way of life and our system of government. A lot of people are trying to figure that out right now, but I feel like there's a way in which the classical education and the values attendant therein need to be reinvigorated in a way that's not anachronistic, right? When I tell people that you should be reading old books, it's not just because these books are old. It's because there's value in them and there's something in there that it's just hard to find these days.
That's why, I mean, that's why I was very glad. And thank you again for your kind remarks about Mehan's Mammals. I wanted to write a new book that
mm,
does this good work because I was tired of everyone saying, oh, that's just old and therefore
right,
it's good or bad. I'm like, how
right.
about something new that's also doing this work, right? Like I wanted to do that, right? Like, and I think it doesn't actually matter its age. It just we keep the ones that are really good. Maybe mine lasts, maybe it doesn't. Whatever. I hope it does. But I'm no Homer. But the we keep the great ones. Uh, we keep the great ones because they're so productive of human flourishing. Right? That's what they're for. Like the training of prudence, right? Uh, the ability to make a judgment. The part of that is like, why would we teach people drawing, proportion, beauty? Like, why should you learn classical drawing, which is a part of classical education, right? Like actually using a sketchbook and understanding how shadow and proportion work and where the focal points should be on a square and on a rectangle, horizon lines, all of those kinds of things. Why? Well, one, it's beautiful and we're meant for beauty, so it's fitting to us. But two, the training in beauty is the power of man is analogous. Like we can draw an analogy between I see someone say something on the street and it strikes me as inappropriate and ill-fitting to the moment. And part of the judgment of like that guy's maybe not as practically wise and prudent as he should be, and I'm not going to follow him today. Part of that is the judgment of being trained according to beauty, because fittingness, the appropriate, is part of how we actually judge prudential acts, whether or not they're truly wise to do, and what their social ramifications will have. What I'm talking about is so foreign to most everybody's discourse today, but it's literally the argument of the first book of one of the most read, studied, copied, memorized, printed. It was the second book off the Gutenberg printing press after the Bible, the most copied book of the Middle Ages. It's called Cicero's On Duties. It was the foundation for the Columbian Order, which Frederick Douglass read as a slave and realized he could free himself through education, right? Like these kinds of arguments about what a classical education and a liberal arts education will do for your ability to choose wisely and well good things for you and others, right? Self-government. Uh, there's a great tradition in this, which I think we almost lost. I think we didn't lose it. And I think
Mm.
that the cat's out of the bag, the fire is lit. I don't think they can put the genie back in the bottle. I'm sure I can go to a fourth metaphor, but the rule of threes is too rich, so I'll hold there. They're not going to stop what's popped. It's happening, right? Like it's happening. People get it. There's this whole way of educating. I mean, Hillsdale, I was just at the groundbreaking this weekend on the home campus. We just opened a master's of arts in classical education. We started a pilot class this semester. We're breaking ground on a huge, beautiful building right on the quad on the home campus in Hillsdale, Michigan. Right, University of Dallas just started one. All these different groups like Circe and the ICLE and the classical learning test was in the New York Times. Jeremy Tate's a good friend of mine. I was at his gala. I've been an early supporter of that. The classical ed and liberal arts is just on the march and on the move. It's taking over all these um, private schools. Parochial schools are switching to them. You've got all the charter schools and all now that the money's following all the public school students to whatever charter they choose in private school,
Mm.
even it's going to explode. And frankly, the only thing stopping it, I can tell you, is the teachers aren't trained enough. And that's why we're desperate to try to train more teachers. So I think we almost lost it, but we won't. And that I consider to be a great and mighty benefice of Providence that it wasn't actually snuffed out because it could be.
Yeah,
North Africa lost the tradition.
and
We
a
could too.
testament to its power, right? That people are still willing uh to defend it so vociferously. So I mean, I'm glad you mentioned Hillsdale and the School of Government that you're at on the DC campus, as well as the Michigan campus. I know a very good number of Hillsdale alumni at this point, even though I did not attend myself. Uh, I wanted to ask you because you are involved with the graduate school there in the capital. What is the value of this form of education in terms of training leaders, right? Because it really is a kind of leadership school. And I think when people hear that term leadership, it's sort of an amorphous term. It has a sort of like weird LinkedInification of it these days, where a leader is just like
Yeah.
somebody at a corporation or something like that who gets the team to get the job done. But the way in
Well,
which
it has a feeling of the Pied Piper too, of just sort of like following, sort of sending a herd hither and thither, right? Sort of just all over, right?
right,
Leading
right,
where?
right.
What's your
Yeah,
activity?
leadership to what ends? It's unclear. So I wanted to ask you, like, how do you think about the training of the next generation of leaders in the program, and what is the value, for lack of a better term, of of spending some time studying these texts and getting familiar with it within a group and with other individuals like yourself who spent a long time um, examining them and thinking about them. Um, how is that preparing people to take on leadership in this deeper sense that's not sort of some, you know, trivial position?
Yeah, so it's for us, it's a master's in government, but the Latin's actually it's a master's of arts in gubernanda republicae, the governing of a republic. So
Mm-hmm.
it's an art, not a science. It's not political science. It's actual art. That is to say, you have to get the hang of it. It's a praxis, right? It's not just a series of theoretical principles. It's actually a kind of doing, a being at work, if you want to use the Aristotelian fancy pantsery. Um, it, and the degree is actually, to put it somewhat glibly, but I don't think obscuringly. Um, it's designed to give the kind of education that the founding fathers had, one of actual liberal arts, humanities, political theory, law, judgment, history, experience, uh, art, that refines the judgment to such a degree that you could actually hit the mark in making laws and governing institutions, both ethically, prudently, and effectively. Um, the To repeat myself, because I think all three are one at the end of the day. But uh, one of the interesting features of the program, to kind of, which is I like to highlight, generally because it's up my alley, and I helped design the curriculum, and it was a great honor that Dr. Arnn and Dr. Spalding, uh, right, allowed my counsels into the mix. But one of the neat parts of the program is that it doesn't just do political theory; it actually teaches political thought and literature courses that merge political theory and literature together, on the grounds that the principles of politics are one thing, but how they're practiced, the way in which they're implemented, is another. And examples of tragic and comic implementation of principle or instantiation of principle is frankly what the poets do, right? Creon versus Antigone. We teach Sophocles Antigone. That's a powerful example. People having many of the right principles, but not assembling them correctly and then implementing them in the wrong modes, too harshly, too hastily, too finally, too slowly, right? All of the sort of warp and woof of politics, which are usually ignored in these programs. It's just here are the various principles. Now go. Well, that's half of it is how do you do the thing? So we interweave these sorts of things. We also, it's not just about judgment, it's also about actual arts. One of the crown of the liberal arts, which no one talks about anymore, literally the queen of the liberal arts is rhetoric, oratory, the art of persuasion to the truth through speech, right? How
Mm.
do you lead others peacefully and not just menace them in fear, which devolves into lack of trust and tyranny, right? How do you do that? If you don't know the arts of rhetoric and persuasion, if you don't know how to use speech and image to move people, right, to the truth, to just action, or away from unjust actions, right, to quell the mob, if you will. If you don't know how to do that, and you don't know all of the available means of persuasion, then you're going to be severely limited in your ability to govern. Because you're like, well, there's nothing we can do here, so just give up, capitulate, or here are two other terrible dumb options that are nowhere near as civilized and successful. So uh, we have a number of aspects of the program that are sort of interwoven, that shape judgment in this kind of more classical, I think more sapiential and prudential way than the sort of expertism of political science, or specialization of something less driving towards um, governing prudence.
Hmm. Yeah, that's an excellent answer. And I hope that gives people a little bit of an idea of what we mean um, by both leadership as well as the value of classical education more broadly. Mr. Mehan, thank you so much for your time. Before we go, I just wanted to ask, or give you the opportunity rather, to um, let us know if there's anything that you're working on at the moment that we might, want to look forward to, another book, or some other project that you're excited about.
I'm currently working on a dialogue between a young man and an old man. basically about how to navigate growing up and being a responsible American father. Because it's actually a very complicated matter to do well, I think. Um, it's going to take up all kinds of different, very interesting issues, but it's not written yet, so I don't want it to oversell its thematic excellence and importance yet. But I'm excited about that, so you can look for that in about a year. I'm also working on a new children's book. I don't want to give too much away, but it's a little more of a juvenile fiction, and it's about a particularly colorful character that has to struggle with wrath.
Hmm.
Mehan's Mammals, the overarching theme was dealing with sadness through zeal and friendship. And the Handsome Little Cygnet's overarching theme was dealing with threats to one's identity by understanding one's nature and the nature of those who love you best and most. And this one's going to have to deal with the rightful recognition of injustice and basically the tempering of one's anger so that you actually use that anger productively as opposed to destructively. So I'm very
Wow.
excited about that one too.
Oh, me too. Well, so those are some excellent virtues to instill into the young, and I'm looking forward to that as well as your other dialogue. Um, thank you so much, Mr. Meehan. I appreciated your time, and thank you for coming on. And that's all we have for today, folks. Thank you.